Well, hey everyone, Athena Dean Holtz here, and welcome to the Redeemed and Restored broadcast on my YouTube channel, where we connect every Friday so that together we can intentionally discover the faithfulness of God. So today's episode of Redeemed and Restored is entitled Yet Another Full Circle Moment. My trip to the Spark Media Conference at the National Religious Broadcasters Convention was one divine appointment after another. But the red thread that kept coming from every direction was how people were watching my journey on Facebook, on my YouTube channel, podcasts, and Facebook Lives, and how they were so encouraged by what God was doing even after all that I'd been through. I still can barely comprehend it myself that God could continue to work all things together for good and use my meager offering for His glory. But He does, and I believe He will continue. I'm open to all the ways He wants to use my journey and my gifts to shine the light on His faithfulness, and I'm excited to see how it all comes together. So I'm filming this intro in my home office upstairs, one of the only rooms in the house that has air conditioning, because the heat in Enumclaw has been over 100 degrees for days. Funny how we whine about all the rain, and then when we have extended heat and sunshine, we whine about that. Such a good reminder that God brings the good and the bad, the rain and the drought. And sometimes the heat helps us to recall how God uses heat to purify precious metals. That's what we are. And while the heat is uncomfortable, it definitely has a job to do and is much easier when we yield so that sanctification can come. So you know the drill. Be sure to like, follow, share, comment, and click on the notification bell in one of those corners. Maybe even start a conversation under the discussion tab. So hey, let's get started. Okay everyone, Athena Dean Holtz here for this week's edition of Redeemed and Restored. Today's episode is entitled Yet Another Full Circle Moment. So this is another full circle I thought would be worth recording at the Spark Media Conference held at the NRB, which is the National Religious Broadcasters. It was in Dallas the week of June 21st, but I just never got time to do it there. So for some context, in February of 2017, I launched my memoir, Full Circle, at the NRB in Orlando. My story of 13 years of horrific spiritual abuse went out into the world as God continued to redeem and restore me. I was still on the radio with Always Faithful, and Redemption Press continued to grow. So this year, when we received some PPP stimulus funds as a company to reward us for not laying off employees during the pandemic, I acted on the advice I was given to invest some of those funds into activities that would grow the company. When I saw that the Spark Media Conference for Christian podcasters had sponsorship opportunities for this summer, I jumped at the chance to promote our authors to a room full of podcasters looking for content for their shows. Having two different podcasts myself sealed the deal. I have lots to learn about podcasting, and I'm committed to making both the All Things podcast and this broadcast podcast of Redeemed and Restored as professional and engaging as possible. While I attended the Spark event, the episode that dropped of Redeemed and Restored wrapped up my 9 months of unpacking each chapter of my Full Circle book. Wow. It's a bit surreal to see all the full circles here and realize how much it has been like labor pains and giving birth since October 1st, when the video broadcast and audio podcast were launched. There was so much I hadn't had an opportunity to unpack. so much that I'd avoided because the pain was so great. So going back now and digging into each chapter and the depth of the deception, as well as the reality of God working all things together for good throughout, in spite of my bad decisions. Well, it was healing and refreshing and restorative all at the same time. Here's something I just realized. I never just sat down and wrote my story of spiritual abuse and God's restoration. That kind of a process is so cathartic and healing, which I experienced to a degree as I blogged for the first few years and looked back on what I'd come out of and processed all that God revealed to me. So during that time, He healed me of so many traumatic wounds of the heart. But when I gave all those blog posts and radio shows to Inger, my editor, and said, "Here, you do it," there was a bit of arm's length to the whole experience by this time. I was 5 years into my healing and restoration, and God had done so many miracles. And honestly, I really didn't want to revisit all that pain. But God knew just what I needed. I needed to revisit all of it and go deeper to understand what had happened to me and just how good God was to save me from the enemy's grasp. Little did I know all the divine appointments and challenges that would be included in this little adventure. And this trip to NRB was so filled with God's reminders to me of His unfailing faithfulness. It left me in awe and wonder as the trip came to a close. From the first day of the conference, as I posted on Facebook, my friend from San Antonio messaged me and said, "Hey, I'm down in the lobby." I'm like, "What is she doing here?" It had been 6+ years since I last saw her, and she was such a huge part of my healing journey as our friendship blossomed back in 2013. She was in the room when I was offered my first radio show on AM 630 KSLR in San Antonio. I was convalescing on her couch as the plans for launching Redemption Press began. So many times during my stay in San Antonio, God used her to show me His love for me in ways she didn't even remember happening. I remember one time I didn't have the money to pay for my radio show, and I didn't tell anyone. I knew God wasn't pulling the plug, so I just trusted Him that He would provide. I don't remember every detail, but something shifted in Deb's plan, and we ended up meeting for Thai food, and she just started explaining to me something financially that had changed. I don't even remember the details, but she had an extra $1,000 she wanted to give me. That was like the exact amount I needed for my airtime, but I hadn't told her of my need. But God. Other times we laughed and wept as we processed our pain together. It was such a healing time for me. So to have time with her at the beginning and the end of my stay in Dallas was so affirming. But God wasn't done with me yet. Also on the last day, the Spark Media Podcast Awards happened, and I was named Best Female Podcast Host. What? I was blown away. I did not see that coming, as I was up against some stiff competition. So the thing I love doing the most, radio and podcasts, was reaffirmed for me this week, and the impact it is making was made clear. Believe me when I say God will take our meager offering and bless others through it. I am overcome with wow and wonder at how God works and His incredible faithfulness. So hey, thanks for joining me today. I'd sure appreciate it if you would like, follow, share, and comment on this episode. I'd even love to connect with you in some way to hear how God is working in your My name is Athena Dean Holtz, and this is Redeemed and Restored. So thanks for joining us today on the Redeemed and Restored video broadcast, brought to you by me, Athena Dean Holtz, who happens to be a horse lover, and the Romans 828 bookstore, which is a division of Redemption Press, which is right down the street that way, around the corner, right here in downtown Enumclaw, where everything is happening. So I would love to have you review and share this broadcast with friends, family, and others who could use the encouragement. And if you know someone who might prefer the audio podcast version of today's episode, you can go over to redeemedandrestoredpodcast.com and share a link from there. So thank you so much for joining me today. See you next week right here on YouTube for another episode of Redeemed and Restored.